And do you want to stop screen share for now since I'm gonna start?
Oh yeah, sorry.
I know that's fine. I can't see you. Good morning, James. All right, good morning, you guys. Thanks for joining. We will get started at 10 o'clock, so you still have a few extra minutes just to get settled in, maybe grab beverage if you need. You can say hi in the chat box or ask any questions you may have bright and early this morning in the Q&A box. But yeah, we'll just get started right at 10 o'clock, so we'll see you in a few minutes, and thanks for joining. All right, can you guys see that screen? Maybe a nod, yes? Okay, great. All right. So it is 10 o'clock. Welcome, we're so happy you're here for our 9th and final webinar class of the summer. If you have been here since July, thank you. And if you are just joining us today for the first time, also thank you and welcome. My name is Lauren, and I'm the Water Conservation Specialist here at Big Bear Lake Department of Water. And I am co-hosting this webinar series, Water and Fire and Plants Oh My, with our Public Information and Conservation Supervisor, Sierra Orr. Sierra, do you want to say hello? Hello.
Hi, everybody.
So today we are featuring guest speaker and Greywater expert, Laura Allen. She is here to conclude our 9 sessions with her class on saving trees during drought, which I know is a pressing concern for many of our customers right now. Laura is an author, lecturer, and founding member of Greywater Action. She has over 15 years of experience exploring low-tech, urban, sustainable water solutions, and we are happy she has been able to share her knowledge as it relates to Big Bear and our customers. So as you can see, we have made it. Today is our 9th and last session in a webinar series along the Yellow Brick Road. Throughout this journey, we have learned from all about fire-resistant landscaping from Douglas Kent, including topics on creating defensible space, essentials of protection, and managing wild vegetation. Orchid Black shared the importance of native plants, including classes that highlighted Big Bear specific natives, how to build rain gardens and swales, and how to create habitat for wildlife and important pollinators in the area. Laura has also taught her Greywater 101 and Lawn Eater landscape classes this summer, and we are looking forward to her last session. If you missed any of our webinars this summer, they have all been recorded, and it is important to know that each class is different and offers something unique and something unique to incorporate in and around your house here in Big Bear. Recordings will be available to those that register, and access to them are emailed once. I'm sorry, my eyes are going crazy. Sorry. Recordings will be available to those that register, and we'll email those out to you the next day or so. All classes will also be uploaded on our YouTube channel titled Big Bear Water. You can type that in the search engine, and you should be able to pull those up if you missed a class or want to rewatch one on a later date. Well, and that is all, folks. We are so thankful for everyone that has participated in this webinar series, and we hope you have picked up a few tips and tricks to water-wise your home and landscape. A huge thank you to all of our presenters, Orchid, Douglas, and Laura, as well as for taking us through these series. These sessions were targeted for all Big Bear Valley residents and business and property owners. So please be sure to share your knowledge and links to the videos with your local friends and neighbors to help get out the good word. Although our series may be over today, water conservation is a California way of life, and we live it and practice it daily. Last but not least, this class is catered to you. It's an interactive session, so please feel free to utilize the Q&A and chat at any point if you have any questions. If questions are answered live by Laura, we will note that. If they don't get answered during Laura's presentation, we will make sure to address the questions at the end. Also during the Q&A session, if you prefer to speak, raise your hand and we should be able to unmute you at that time. Also, on top of these free classes and webinars, we offer a variety of water conservation and efficiency rebates to our customers. If you are interested in upgrading your irrigation system with new sprinklers or controllers, or want to start collecting rainwater with rain barrels, check out our website or send us an email. Our native plant program is also live this year, and fall is an ideal time to plant natives. Our shopping list and further information about that program is available on our website. If you have questions, don't be shy, give us a call. Without further ado, I do believe it is time to begin learning about trees and how to save them during drought. So I'll turn this over to Laura.
Thank you. And thanks everybody for being here this morning. It's exciting that this webinar, the whole series was really exciting and all these topics fit so well together. So I'm going to conclude talking about your trees, and I'm going to share my screen and get the presentation going. And so, trees are these really, they're kind of like the structural part of your landscape. If you have older trees, they could have been growing longer than you've lived on your property. They could be older than you are, definitely older than your children might be. And trees need really, they're very different than our annual plants and even bushes and shrubs and other smaller plants that are more easily replaceable. And so I want to conclude the series. This is the third one, and maybe some of you have been to the others. So some of the information will be repetitive because I want to bring in some general gray water info that's important for any type of system and any time you're considering putting your water outside into your landscape. And then some of it is new and more focused on the trees. It's a more streamlined topic. So it's a great topic for the end of the summer where you might have had this huge list of all the things you're going to get done in your yard. And this is how I operate, all the stuff I'm going to finish. And then when it gets to September, I'm like, oh no, I haven't done all these things. What am I actually going to do before the season really changes? And so if you are in a similar place, maybe you had a lot of projects you were going to embark on and you weren't able to complete them all. This might be one that you can really take action on and really put your focus and energy into one thing. And your trees definitely deserve it. So I'm sure you're here to listen to about trees and gray water. So I'm sure you know trees are so important. Not only do they clean our air, they shade our homes. They've been shown to reduce energy loads. They're just so many valuable benefits that trees bring, personal benefits, community benefits, and then kind of global benefits to our environment. And so if you have trees on your landscape, you might really appreciate them. You might notice how it's so much cooler under them, how the birds go to the trees and it provides habitat. Maybe there's a swing hanging from your tree. Maybe you have fruit trees and you get fruit. There's so many range of benefits that we get from our trees. And trees are really vulnerable during droughts. You're going to hear, anytime there's water shortages, the first thing that we should all stop doing is watering lawns, watering kind of these maybe less necessary type of landscapes. And when we stop watering our lawn, that's really important and good if you have a lawn, but you might have also been watering trees and not even realized it. So sometimes during a drought or any time there's water shortages, people do the right thing. They really listen to water agencies giving these messages of, stop, we need to reduce our water because we are limited right now. And people might not be aware that they could be harming their trees because their trees were actually accessing all of that water. Trees don't always show the damage that's being done to them right away. So this is something that can take a year, maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years to really come up. But the drought stress, it weakens them, so they are weaker, and that makes them more vulnerable to other problems like pests, diseases, things like that, that you might not see right away. So today we're going to just put our focus on the trees and think about how can we keep them healthy, how can we keep water going to them, but also conserve water and leave enough water in the environment during these times of limitations, which, as you know, Californians, we know this is not going to change. Like, we're always going to have water limitations pretty much anywhere in the West, and it's just going to be exacerbated with climate change. Kind of sometimes it's good to think about, personal things that could be impacted. So if your trees become damaged or they're killed, it can be really expensive. And so that's just a logistical reality. To remove a large tree, it costs a lot. It's not something that most people can do themselves. You have to hire somebody. And then to get the benefits back, it can really take decades. So we don't want to damage our trees when we stop irrigating other parts of our landscape, or when we change our landscaping. Maybe you're switching from a more water consumptive landscape to a very low water use landscape, and not considering now your trees who might have been getting that extra water are now not getting that. And so there's all these different ways that we can impact our trees without even being aware of it. And so today I'm going to focus on the easiest thing that you can do with Greywater. So Greywater, this is coming from your home. You already used it. Now it'd be getting a second use to go outside for irrigation. So the easiest thing to do is take your laundry Greywater. If you guys were here for the laundry class last time, you'll know it's doesn't change your plumbing. It doesn't need a permit. It's relatively straightforward for a do-it-yourselfer. It's more flexible. It's easier to distribute the water than most of the other kinds of Greywater systems. So if we can take that water and direct it just to our trees, it also makes your life a little easier. If you've come to the other classes and you're thinking about design and what should I do? I have all these plants I want to water. This can really simplify it. Just head straight to your trees. They will appreciate it, and you don't have to deliberate about all your other potential options. So if you weren't here in the other ones, I'll give you a brief overview about the laundry system. You have a washing machine. It is an appliance. It has a pump inside of it. It's pumping out that water. So instead of pumping that water to your sewer or septic connection, it's now pumping it. It goes right into a diverter valve. That allows you to control the flow. You can either go back to the sewer or septic, or if you turn the handle of the valve, it now goes out to your new irrigation system that you construct. It's similar to a drip, but everything's larger. The pipe is a 1-inch diameter pipe. That's usually the same diameter as the washer discharge hose. So you're not restricting flow. The water's just flowing out as it, through the same diameter pipe. Then you have these outlets that are 1/2 inch in an opening where it's coming out to irrigate the plants. We designed the system to prevent clogging, so you don't have to have filters or any way to try to keep the gunk out of the water. You just let it all go through, and then the filtration actually happens in the landscape. It's a much easier way to manage the gunky stuff in the Greywater. In this picture, you can see the laundry water is going to a variety of plants, not just the trees, but it's also being directed to the trees. And just to note, if you weren't here for the other classes, or just to note that this is just one way to use Greywater. I don't want you to think this is your only option. I'm going to encourage you to focus on this option because it's the easiest, kind of most doable, lowest cost. But if you want to take future action, which is really great, you can tap into other sources of Greywater. Your showers, your sinks, those are other Greywater sources. You can use gravity. So depending on how your home is set up, you can flow that water by gravity out and distribute it by gravity into your landscape. This takes accessing your plumbing. So you have to have a crawl space or a basement, and it takes a flat or downward sloping yard. If your yard's flat, your plants seem to be relatively close to the home. If it's downward sloping, you can use gravity to flow out to your plants. Many homes don't have gravity options, so you do need to have a pump. There can be simple pumped Greywater systems where you're just collecting the water in a tank temporarily. It's being pumped out unfiltered into the landscape, where the filtration happens in the landscape. And you can go up a hill, across a patio, access a large range of geographic slopes that you might encounter. And then there's also filtration options where you can filter the Greywater, and it can go into a specialized drip irrigation system. You can never have a Greywater system where you filter it and then you send it into a conventional drip. So if you already have a drip system in your home, you're not going to be able to just have Greywater going right into that, because conventional drip system is designed for very clean water, and even filtered gray water is not that clean. So it would be a specialized drip system designed for dirtier water. So those are all other options. Today, I'm not going to talk about them, but we will have time at the end to talk about other things. So if you're having questions about showers, sinks, gravity, other pumps, filters, please save those questions at the end, and I'm happy to talk to you about them. And we'll definitely have time because this is a little shorter of a presentation than the previous ones. So here's that laundry to landscape. Kind of talked through the components of it. And just to give you about the costs, it's usually a couple of $100s in materials. It's definitely doable for a do-it-yourselfer. If you're not a do-it-yourselfer, if you're busy, it's usually a 1 or 2 day job for a professional. And there's a big range of costs you can see on the screen. It really depends on who's available, also your particular house. Like in this picture, the laundry machine is on an exterior wall. So just one little hole goes out through the house. Now we're right in the landscape in the area to irrigate. So that's a very small system that could be installed in just a couple of hours. Your home might be really different. You might have to go through the floor, run all the way through a crawl space, go outside, go down a hill, go to another location. There just might be a lot more time involved to get the water from your machine out to your landscape. So that's going to really affect the price because it affects the time it takes and materials to set up the system. But overall, this laundry gray water system is relatively small for a home improvement project, and it's on the lower cost side compared to other gray water systems. So with this gray water system, we are directly taking the laundry water and putting it right into the landscape. So whatever we put in the water is now going to our trees. So you want to make sure that you are not putting a lot of salt into the water. Salt can build up over time. It can damage the soil. So you don't want to use powdered detergents or sodium-based water softeners. You also don't want to add boron, and this is true for all gray water, but really focusing on the laundry, boron is a common ingredient in some laundry detergents. So you want to make sure you're choosing some that don't have boron. It's a plant mycotoxin. It can harm the plants over time. 1 time, 2 times, 10 times, probably not going to do anything, but it's the daily or weekly use over time that can cause these problems, this buildup issue in the soil. Of course, you want things to be biodegradable because it's going to be breaking down in your soil. And these are some different detergents that are suitable. Ecos, that's a pretty easy to find brand. Oasis was made special for gray water. It's less easy to find depending on what you have access to. Biopack, Trader Joe's has a liquid detergent, though it's come to my attention that they've been changing the ingredients. So I'm not sure if all Trader Joe's are suitable or not anymore. I need to go back and check. And then there's more. There's Vasca. There are those little strips that are like kind of instead of the plastic bottle, they're like a embedded little strip of detergent, and it's not a powder. So those are also suitable. Anyone have questions? This can be a question place, and we'll just pause for a second. Anyone have questions about your products when you're using gray water? Okay. And I can't see the chat, so if
yeah, just so everybody knows, you can use the Q&A panel, you can use the chat feature, or you can raise your hand. You can give it a couple of seconds if anybody does have any questions.
Okay.
I don't see any. You're good to go, Laura.
Okay. Yeah, and some of this is a repeat for the people who've been here before. So when you're taking your washing machine water outside, you want to have a very good functioning machine because it's dependent on your machine working. And I just want to call your attention to the pump filter in your washing machine. It's in front loading machines. It catches debris, gunk, pennies, all that stuff that won't fit through getting pumped out through the system. So it's caught in this pump filter, and it typically clogs every so often, depending on how good you are at emptying your pockets or not. And so just make sure that's there. And if you ever have problems where your machine's not pumping out all the water, this is the first place that you should look and clean that out. And if you've never done it, it's definitely a good time to check it out. So we'll look at the pieces a little bit more about how to get your water out to your trees. So you start in the home. You start with your washing machine. You have a washer discharge hose in the picture on the left. It's that black hose. It connects right up to that diverter valve, and that allows you to control the flow. You can send it to your sewer or septic. So So the picture on the left is showing it going over to the left, and it's going to vary where this is based on your laundry room. This one is going into a standpipe in the wall. That's a common setup. Sometimes there's a utility sink. That's another common setup. And it's just fitting in loosely. It's just sticking down into the sewer connection. You can also use a second washer hose and run it back in, just stick it in there like it was before. Now the one on the right, that's the side that goes out to the landscape. I'm not going to go over like all the parts and all the details to build this, but I will give you resources at the end. And the Laundry to Landscape webinar, the last one, goes over a lot more of the details. So if you're ready to do this, you can go and find out, more of the details and all those little parts and pieces that it takes to put this together. So the landscape side, it's going out. In this picture, it's going through the crawl space. So there's a hole going through the floor, and then it's going out through the crawl space to get out to the landscape. The picture on the right, that is an exterior wall. And so that pipe is going straight out the wall. Sometimes your home might be a little more complicated where you have an interior room, you don't have a crawl space. That's the hardest situation, but sometimes it's still doable. Sometimes people discover like, oh, I have a laundry room in the middle of my house, but there's a closet. I can run my pipe just through this back of this closet. It's not a big deal. And then I can go to an exterior wall. Or I've even seen people have to go past a bathroom, and so they just run the pipe like behind the toilet, like through a little bathroom before they get out. So you can get creative if you discover that your home is not so straightforward, like going through the floor or going through the wall. You might have to do a little bit of creativity to get that water outside.
We do have one question, Laura. Dana asked, are ingredients usually listed on detergents? Do you find that those are usually listed on the boxes or the containers?
They aren't always, but the ones that are what I call greywater friendly or plant friendly, they do list them. So if a company doesn't list their ingredients anywhere, not on their web, not on the box, or it's usually not going to be a box if it's for greywater, because boxes are typically powder. But if they don't list it on the product and they don't list it on their website, I will shy away from that because I don't know what's in it. But then if you're not able to get the right product and your trees might die, that's when you can decide, well, as long as I get a liquid detergent, that's not going to be too salty. And your trees will probably be much happier getting some water from a not ideal detergent than not getting any water at all. So you want to kind of take one step back and look at that bigger picture. But if you can, I definitely encourage you to get the best detergent that works for you.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And just to show, some people have a different, some people it's totally suitable for their home to put the valve right on the wall. Other people really want it to match the aesthetics of their existing home. So here's a picture to show that you can make this fit into different aesthetics. This home had custom cabinetry in their laundry room. They wanted their greywater valve to be in a kind of custom cabinet itself. You need to access this easily. So they had an installer, it was professionally installed, run the pipes through the wall. They had to open up the wall, you can see in the picture on the lower right, run through, make a little recessed box and a little cabinet that matched the cabinetry in their home. So that's definitely a possibility. Of course, this will cost a lot more because it's a lot more effort and work, but if this is something that you are interested in, there are ways to make this look a little different versus just the valve right on the wall.
And we do have a couple more questions. Do you want me to save those to the end, Laura? Or
if they're what I've covered so far, now is a great time. But if they're about new stuff, then we could save them.
Okay. This one's new, so I'll save that.
Okay. So I already mentioned this before, but now at this point, you need to pipe your water directly outside to your plants. So you don't have to get into the plumbing. You don't need to be able to access the drainage plumbing of your washing machine. You're going directly from the machine itself outside. So now you imagine in your minds, your machine, how would you get outside? Would you go through the wall or would you go through the crawl space and then out? If you can get into the crawl space, there's often vents that you can just cut a little corner of and run a pipe out. So you don't always need to make a penetration in the home if you're going through the crawl space. But if you are going through the wall, you do need to drill a hole through the wall to fit that 1-inch pipe. So think about how you get your water outside, and also think about where your trees are, and you want to end up at the side of the house where you're going to need the water. So the crawl space can be nice for that because you can usually go in different directions. Though sometimes it works out ideally that machine is on an exterior wall by the side of the home that has the landscaping. So now we're outside. And this is, I'm just going to kind of a truncated version of how you would calculate. And when you're just going to your trees, it's a little bit simpler to do these calculations because I guess it depends, but typically it's a little simpler because you just need to look for the plants that you're trying to get to and figure out how much water do you have, and then how many of these plants can you irrigate. And then we also have the question of where can you send the water? So the system has limitations. It's based on using that machine to move the water. And so after we talk about how much gray water you have and how many of these trees can you irrigate, then we'll talk about which of these can you actually get the water to. So how much gray water? So this is a very simple formula. You just need to know how many loads per week you're doing in the machine. And you need to know how many gallons per load, and you multiply it. So if you do 4 loads a week and your machine puts out 25 gallons per load, you would have 100 gallons per week of gray water. So the loads per week, that's easy. Just ask the person who does the laundry, or put a little sticky note on your machine and have everyone who does laundry make a little tally mark throughout the week. Do it for maybe 2 weeks to get, or 3, get a good estimate. And then the gallons per load, the best thing you can do to be the most accurate is to put a container and actually collect the water. If you have a front loader, this is quite easy to do because front loaders usually discharge between 12 and 15 gallons per load. So you just need a couple of 5-gallon buckets and you can move that discharge hose through them. It's going to, as the machine washes, it will pump out all the wash water and you can collect that. That's half of the water, and then it'll rinse and it'll do it again. So it's relatively easy to manage that much water without spilling and making a giant mess. If you have a top loader, those put out a lot more water. They can be 40 gallons. That's a lot of water to collect. So you'll need like a trash can or some kind of larger container to collect all that water. But it is ideally the way you want to go if you want to calculate more precisely. You don't have to. You can use the estimates. So if you have a front loader, you can say about 12 gallons. If you have a top loader, you can say about 40 gallons. So you can use those numbers if you want to, and they're in the resources that you're going to get. And yeah, so we'll move on. So you know about how much gray water. And now, how much water do the trees need? And I went into this a little bit more in detail in the Laundry to Landscape class, but I'm going to go over it just kind of briefly to get you a sense of how many of these trees you can irrigate. So we're looking at peak irrigation, though when we get into a drought situation, you really just want to give your plants, especially your trees, as much water as you can, but using peak irrigation will give you a good idea of how many of these plants can you really adequately soak, give them enough water so they stay happy. And then you might need to supplement some of your other trees. So you want to look at the size of your plant, and larger plants use more water. So the kind of in the summertime, your tree needs about 1/2 gallon per week of planted area. So if you look at your tree, its footprint, the area of the tree, it's like the shadow of a tree. So it's usually a circle, about a circle underneath the branches. So that's what we'll call the footprint, or the area of the tree, the shadow. And it's a circle. So we use pi r squared. Pi is 3.14, but we'll just say 3 because that's totally suitable for these calculations. So we multiply 3 times the radius of the tree, from the trunk to the edge of the branches. That's the radius of our circle under our tree. So pi times the radius times the radius. And then we get an area, and we cut that in half, and we get our gallons per week. If you do this number for a large tree, you might come up with a huge amount of water. And your tree does really need that water, but it's also probably tapping into other sources. So it doesn't mean you have to give a large tree like hundreds of gallons of water, though that means that tree needs a lot of water. And so you might be finding out, well, maybe I should give this one large tree I have all of my laundry water. Or maybe you don't have large trees. You have several smaller trees because you're in a newer landscape. Then you can decide, well, I have enough to water like 4 of these trees, but not all 7 that I planted, for example. And so just a quick example, how many gallons per week would a tree with a 20 square foot area require? You take the square footage and you cut it in half. It's Pretty simple. 10 gallons per week. So that's going to be a pretty small tree. So we'll skip that one. And so I shared this resource in the previous presentation, but it's also really nice to I want to make sure you're all aware of it. It's an app. It's called puddlestumpers.com. So that's the website. It has different apps to help you with finding irrigation needs of your plants. And so you can go to the How Much Water app, and this can help you if you have a lot of trees, if you feel like you need a little more guidance making choices about how many to water. This is a great place to go. So you will go to the How Much Water app, and it has a drop-down menu of different cities, and Big Bear Lake is not on the drop-down menu. And so you can use Sacramento as a replacement because Sacramento has a really similar summertime climate. This is, it's called the evapotranspiration rates, which is how much water do the plants, they're evaporating it off it's evaporating off the ground and their leaves. They're called evapotranspiration. It's kind of the combination of the water that they're uptaking and letting go through their leaves. And there are these tables where you can see the historic numbers. And you can see in this slide, Sacramento and Big Bear Lake are very similar in the summer months when they need the most water. And so if you want to use this app, just use Sacramento as a replacement in the drop-down menu, which looks like this. So you pick the city. Not all of them are there. There's a lot, but not all. And then you say when, weekly in July. And then you say what plant. And trees are typically moderate water use plants. Though if you've like planted native trees, they're usually lower water use plants. So you will want to know a little bit about your plants, but if you have fruit trees or any trees that need irrigation, typically it's probably going to be a moderate water use plant. And then you want to see where is it? Is it in the sun or in the shade? Because plants in the sun need more water than plants that are in the shade. Probably your trees are going to be in the sun if they're the bigger plants in your landscape. And then you say how wide it is. And this is the width, like branches to branches, not the radius, like the previous one. So you say how wide it is, and then you just click calculate, and you get a number. And so this is a relatively small tree, probably a young fruit tree. You can see it needs 14 gallons in July. And the same situation, same tree, same place. In October, it needs 6. So you can see how the summer is when your trees need the most water. And so now we're at the limitation of, where can you send the water? So this is kind of the third question before you can determine where to send this laundry water out to save your trees. If your trees are uphill from your yard, you actually can't use this system. You will have to do a pumped gray water system, which is definitely doable, but it's not the simple thing I'm explaining in this presentation. So if you have an upward sloping yard, it's a little harder. Hopefully you have trees that are flat or even downhill from your house because you can easily reach them with your laundry machine. If your yard is flat, your washing machine is actually pushing that water through all of the pipe from the pump in the machine. And it can't go an indefinite distance because as it goes through the pipe, it's encountering friction and that works the pump. And so we don't want to overwork our pump. So 50 feet, that is a relatively, kind of a rule of thumb, safe distance to ask the machine to pump the water. You can probably go a little farther. You can definitely go shorter, but keep 50 feet in mind as a relative safe distance. So if you have trees within 50 feet of your washing machine on a flat yard, you can irrigate them. If you have a downward slope on your yard, you can go as far as you want. You probably need to slow the flow down so it doesn't just rush down to the bottom unless you're just trying to get to one location down there. And that you can see that pipe is kind of snaking down the hill to slow the flow. But that's kind of a limitation that you'll be working with to determine where you can send the water. And so when you get to your trees, the best place to water them, it's called the drip line. So if you imagine like a light rain, the water is going to be dripping off the edge of the branches. That's the drip line. And that is the best place to water your trees. You don't want to be right by the trunk. That's not a good place at all. You can usually be farther than the drip line. The roots usually go out for a mature tree much farther, so you can see in this picture. But that's where the tree is going to be seeking out moisture. So you want to head to the drip line, maybe a little beyond. It could be a little within under the branches, but you want to be careful you don't get too close to the trunk. And that's where you're going to be directing the gray water. So if you have a small tree, this will be really obvious. If you have a large tree, like maybe you have one big tree in your yard or big-ish, you could probably send the water anywhere in your yard and it would be accessing the water. Looking at this picture, you can see how trees really, if you were irrigating lawns or flower beds or other things that you might have stopped, you can see how the trees had been sending out roots, getting that water from other parts of the landscape and using that to grow and sustain the tree. And so when that water stops, the tree is really looking and lacking in the irrigation water. So this picture, this is a very small tree, so it's really super obvious where the edge of the branches are and not a lot of places you could go other than where the person is digging a basin. So when we're irrigating with gray water, we are putting in wood chips. These are very important for a couple of reasons. They are the filter. So we're putting wood chips down. The gray water is flowing through the wood chips. It's filtering out debris, lint, hair, gunky stuff, just all this stuff in gray water gets stuck into the wood chips and the water soaks through, hits the soil and then goes down, and the tree roots grow to that water. They really will seek out the moisture. It's not too deep. It's a shallow basin. So it's usually maybe 6 inches, 8 inches, 12 inches. That's the range of the depth of the basin. And it's all full of wood chips. In California, you have to be irrigating the place where gray water comes out. It needs to be 2 inches covered by something. And with the mulch basin, it's usually covered by the wood chips. Not directly, I'll show you how you actually irrigate in a sec, but it's below the wood chips. And that prevents exposure to gray water. As you know, gray water is not potable, so we don't want anyone to unsuspectingly be exposed to the gray water. We wouldn't want kids playing in it and then putting their hands in their mouth and ingesting it, because it's not going to be a healthy water to get inside our bodies. So when the gray water is going down, being filtered by wood chips, there's no contact with humans or pets, and that's completely safe and legal. So the wood chips, they're also called arbor mulch or playground wood chips or kind of wood chipper wood chips. They're larger. They're like usually 1/2 inch to 1 inch, maybe even 1.5 inches if it's from like a wood chipper. So they're bigger. The bigger wood chips last longer. They don't break down as quickly, but eventually over time, whatever kind of chip you use will break down. And this is a maintenance point, which I'll talk about at the end. Kind of the last thing to think about once you have a system is how do you maintain it and keep it going on for the long term. So here's our basin. This one is in a circle. It doesn't have to be a circle, but it can, going around this small tree. It'll be filled up with the wood chips, and that's where the gray water is going to go. Sometimes people wonder, like, for fire safety, I didn't attend the fire classes, but there's, different recommendations around fire safety. And one of them is to not have wood chips around. This is not a large area of wood chips. This is more of a small wood chipped area, and it's moist. And it's not the same thing as like covering your entire yard with wood chips. It's selectively using these in a location, and they're getting a frequent dose of moisture. So they are not, it's just different, and I've never heard problems with it in terms of fire safety. So here's some other pictures. These are also small trees. A lot of my pictures have young trees because people often do gray water when they're doing new plantings, they're doing landscape alterations. But of course, if you're trying to save existing trees, yours is going to look a little different than this, but it's all the same concepts, the same techniques. It's just going to look a little different. When you have a big tree, you're going to be much farther away where you put your basin. So this picture, you can see the black tubing, that's the main gray water line coming from the washing machine, so 1 inch size. And then there's a feeder line going into the trench. This basin is kind of a wavy trench in front of a couple of newly planted trees. And the black thing is called a mulch shield. We'll talk about that more in a second, but you can see the water's flowing through the wood chips, and then the tree is going to grow and access that water. So that mulch shield, that is keeping your tree roots from clogging up your system. If you put moisture out to a plant, it's going to grow to it. Trees especially can grow roots very quickly, and they can grow right up your pipe. They'll grow far as they can get to. I've seen people pull out like 30 feet of, solid mass of roots that have gotten into the pipe itself. And if your pipe is big, the roots will get bigger. If your pipe is small, they'll be smaller, but they will clog up the whole system. So we want to make sure the roots can't actually get to the water source, which is our greywater system. We want to make sure that they can get to the moist soil, not the water source. So what we do is we make what's called a mulch shield. It's an enclosed area going around the outlet. So it's creating airspace. So the greywater has to flow through air, which the roots won't grow through. Then it hits the wood chips, it's filtered, and then it hits the soil. This picture is showing a mulch shield being made from a section of drain pipe. So usually like a 6-inch drain pipe, it could be even larger. Drill a little hole, that's where the greywater comes in. You cover the top, you can purchase a cap, or you can use a flagstone or a paver or some way to keep the top from getting filled in, and also a place where you can easily find it. And then that is sitting in the basin itself. This is that previous picture you saw, but calling your attention to those mulch shields. These are using irrigation valve boxes. This is a standard component in irrigation systems. We are adapting them to be used as mulch shields. They're pretty nice because they're very sturdy. They can be stepped on. There's a lid, that green cap will go and close. They're big openings. So if you have a top loading machine, you might want to use a larger mulch shield. Front loaders, you can use the smaller drain pipe, but if you have a top loader, or if you're just going to a couple trees and you're sending more water, then this is a really good option. And the lid goes on, the mulch basin gets filled, and all you see is that little cap. So here's, you can see multiple ones. Here you can see them in the landscape. Here you can see these basins being dug. So I'm going to be toggling through a couple pictures just to call your attention to things. So here you can't really tell that there's an actual basin. It's not a lot to see except these caps. This tree is getting more water. It's getting watered in different points. You can either send one point to your tree or multiple ones. It kind of depends on your setup. Here, the basins are being dug around the trees. The basins can be circular. They can be trenches. You've seen different shaped basins in these images. And then when they're done, there's not a lot to see, just these caps. And this is a pathway. So this is a wood chipped pathway. So what you can't see is there's actually a deeper basin of wood chips in front of these trees where the greywater is going. And then there's a very narrow, a small layer of wood chips on the path in this landscape. So it blends in well. Your yard might be different. The wood chips might be really distinct because you don't have them in the rest of your yard. So they might be very visible, or they might blend in just depending on what your yard looks like. And so you can set up one of these systems, pretty quick, get the water outside, but I don't want you to forget about the longevity of it and making sure that you know what maintenance is required. It's not a lot, it's very little, but pretty much anything needs some amount of maintenance or just attending to, including this laundry greywater system. So you have a place where the water's coming out into your basin. That's the place that needs the most maintenance. Typically, you want to check on it. When the wood chips start decomposing, they're going to turn into a really nice organic soil material, and you can remove that and bury it near your tree. Help keep feeding the tree. You could put it into your compost, whatever you want to do with it, but you need to replace that with fresh wood chips. This is typically once a year, but if you're putting a lot of water, like maybe you have a big tree and you're sending all your laundry water just to one tree, and you have like maybe 2 locations, you're watering 2 sides of the tree, that might require maintenance maybe a little bit more frequently. Sometimes if you're not sending a lot of water, if you have very small trees, you might not even need to do anything for 2 years, though you should always check on it once a year. So there's going to be a range, but that's the place that you need to go. You have the valve, and there's this anti-siphon component. I didn't really talk about that because I wanted to stay focused on the kind of bigger picture, like getting the water from inside to outside, and you guys will have a lot of resources to see all the little details. But those ones, you're going to visually inspect them as you're doing laundry. Most of that part is right by your machine, so you don't have to do anything special. Nothing should leak, it should all be watertight, but if there ever was a leak, you would know, oh, there's a problem, I need to address it. And then if you're just watering a few plants, you're not going to have any valves. I didn't talk about those in this presentation, but if you're trying to spread out the water, you do have the option of putting some small shutoff valves to control the flow a little bit. And those are something that you would need to check on. And so the last kind of question before we stop for your questions is, can you do this yourself or do you want to hire someone? So as you've seen, these parts are plastic. They are, if you make a mistake, you can just cut them out, redo it. You do glue all of the things inside your home. You don't want any leaks. So once you get in the landscape, you're putting tubing together with barbed fittings, which you can actually pull apart. You can replace them, change things. It's a very forgiving system. So if you are kind of a do-it-yourselfer, if you do repair projects, this is something you can definitely do yourself, especially if you're really just trying to get the water from your washing machine to your trees. Like it's just a quick thing. You'll need to dig a trench, there's digging involved, that kind of thing, but it's not typically very complicated. But if you're not someone who does that, or you're really busy, then you can hire someone. I do encourage you to get as clear as you can on what you want, because that will really help you communicate to your installer. I'll show you a resource where you might be able to find someone local, but I'm not certain. And if not, you can always go to a landscaper. Landscapers are going to be the best people to do this system. You can see there's not really any plumbing. I mean, this is like plumbing type material, sort of. It's more irrigation, because these are all 1-inch parts. You're not changing the plumbing of your home at all. You do have to get from inside to outside. So that is someone who knows how to drill through a wall or through the floor. That's a very small kind of construction type skill. Everything else is landscaping. And so if you are finding someone new to hire, I would recommend some kind of ecological landscaper, someone who's more focused on maybe natives or organic gardening, or that kind of trend. And they would be hopefully open to learning something new if you can't find someone that's already done these kind of systems. You can share the resources, there's recorded webinars. You want to find somebody who's open to learning something new, and you definitely don't want someone to convince you, oh, I do it this other way. Well, I shouldn't say that. I would be very cautious about letting somebody do something that's really different than what you've learned in these webinars. There's lots of ways you can do it, but a lot of people like to try new things with gray water, and while it may get the water from inside to out, they usually end up being more complicated and more prone to failure. So just be cautious about someone experimenting on your home if you really just want to water your trees. So that's my advice about that. And the do-it-yourselfers, the exiting the house, that is the hardest part of the system. So if you feel like I could do everything else, but not that part, then maybe you would want to hire someone to drill that hole going through the home. You can, there's lots of resources out there to learn how to do these home improvement projects. So you could get good resources about how to do that if you feel confident to try something like that. And then I definitely encourage you, the outside part is very forgiving. You can fix things if you don't like how it turned out. So just to end with some resources, I wrote a book called Greywater Green Landscape. It's a do-it-yourself book. It helps you go through the design and the installation. There's also a free manual in the image below it that you can download from our website, greywateraction.org. It's through the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, but it's available to anyone. On our website, we have a forum. So if you get stuck and you have a technical question, you can put it on the forum. We have resources in Spanish and in Mandarin. And there's just a lot of resources on our website. We also have the Hire an Installer tab where you could try to find somebody who could help you if you are looking for that. We also do some online education. So if you're wanting to really go in depth more, you could check out some of our online classes. So very lastly, where do you buy this stuff if you can't find it locally? Most of the stuff you can get from an irrigation store. There are some parts that are harder to find. So I just wanted you to know about this online store called Waterwise Supplies, where they sell kits, where you could actually buy a kit and you can change the the quantities based on your needs. But that can be helpful. It could also be helpful just to go there or go into one of the resources and see all the parts, and then check to see what you can find locally and if you might have to mail order 1 or 2 things. So I'm gonna end there, and I know we have some more questions. So.
All right, so yes, we definitely have a few questions started here. I think we're going to start with Keith. He asked earlier on, some of us have sump pumps discharging to the outside. Would directing the flow to the sub pump area suffice if sub pump just discharges outside near needed the landscape?
Yeah, so if you have a sump pump, are you asking about using that to get your laundry water out, or using that to get groundwater out?
Chief, do you want to talk? I can allow you to talk if you want to clarify your question. Maybe.
Yeah, just the laundry water.
Just laundry water. Yeah, so if you have a sump pump, so there's kind of 2 parts to that question. One is in the California Plumbing Code, which regulates gray water. If you add an auxiliary pump to your gray water system, whatever kind of system you have, that automatically triggers a gray water permit. So you definitely can do that. It triggers a permit. Kind of on the just logistical side, yes, you can use it. Some pumps are usually, they may not be very long lasting for gray water because of all the gunk and debris in the water. It's recommended to use an effluent pump, which is a bit stronger than a sump pump typically is, though some people will use a sump pump for gray water and then they'll just have to get another one in a couple of years.
All right. Does that answer your question, Keith?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'll mute you again. All right. And then so we have a question from Joe. Do you need a building or plumbing permit to add the gray water plumbing?
So for the laundry system, like I focused on it in this talk, you don't need a permit. In the California Plumbing Code, which regulates gray water, there is a section, a permit exempt section, and the washing machine only falls under this permit exempt section. There's 12 health and safety guidelines, which I talked about most of them in here, but not all of them. So if you want to build this and you go to the resources, that will guide you through all of those 12. They're very reasonable. There are setbacks. You don't want to be discharging too close to your property line. You can't put hazardous materials in the water. They're all very reasonable requirements and very easy to comply with. The 2-inch cover, that's kind of a very logistical one. That's part of that to keep people from contacting the water. You're not allowed to have puddling, ponding, runoff. The water needs to be going down. So yes, it's legal. And if you build a system without a permit and then you don't follow the guidelines, you're out of compliance. So it doesn't give people like an open ticket to do whatever they want with their laundry gray water. There's parameters to make sure your system is safe for you and your neighbors and the environment. And then it's legal.
And Joe also asks, does gray water have impact to the taste of vegetable gardens or fruit trees?
Yeah, it does. It does not. And that's a great question because sometimes people wonder about, there's a lot of stuff in the, if you read all the ingredients, you're like, what is all this stuff? And is that good for my plants? Those are really important questions. The plants really care about the salts and the boron and toxic ions like sodium. And if you're keeping those high levels of any toxic ions like sodiums and the salts and the boron, and it's biodegradable, your plants are very happy and they'll uptake that. They don't uptake, I've never heard of a flavor being impacted. Sometimes people just kind of have a bad feeling about it. And it's good to remember that if it's going on your clothes and then we put our clothes on our bodies, that's a really direct contact with the material. When you get into the shower situation, we're putting these products directly on our skin, which absorbs things. So when you think about that, you're having much more exposure to them by using them in your home, your soaps, I guess your laundry detergent's a little questionable, but you do have a lot of contact with bedding and sheets and towels and all that stuff. So if you're concerned about it, then you might not want to be using it at all. If you're concerned about what will happen when it gets outside through the soil into the plant, that whole very lengthy route that these chemicals might take, that's whatever you're concerned about, you probably don't want to be using at all. So that's kind of a long answer. but they don't have an impact. The health concern with gray water is about pathogens like germs. So if somebody is sick, they're shedding pathogens, germs, they get in the water, then somebody else who doesn't live with them, who doesn't already have exposure, then gets that into their body. That's the health concern, which is why gray water has to be subsurface. It needs to stay on your property. You're just kind of trying to prevent exposure. A residential gray water system, the gray water is coming from people who live together. So we have a lot of contact with people we live in the home with. We share dishes and just everything. So if we're going to get each other sick, it happens in the house. When you get outside, the concern, if you're thinking about like a hotel gray water, that's a really different scenario because there's all these people that don't share living space together. And if all their water is now going into a public space, that's a really different risk. And so all of the requirements and concerns and everything are very different than a residential scale gray water where people already share in the home.
Okay, I think that's a great answer to that question. Sierra asks, as the tree grows, will the roots continue past the gray water mulch line, or do you need to move it once the tree gets bigger?
Yeah, that's another important question, especially for young trees, because when your tree is very small, its roots are really close to the trunk. And so that's when you kind of have to make a decision. I typically encourage people to start out relatively close, but not like right on the root ball, because they'll have to move it soon. And then to hand water in the tree that first year, and then the roots will access it. If you're going to a mature tree, the trees are always going to be growing, and they can be very happy when even the roots will grow past it. You don't typically have to move your basins a lot. Most people never do, but when you get to a very small young tree, that's when you really want to make the decision. Are you going to have the tree actually get the gray water from day one and then have to move it next year because the trees grow pretty quickly when they're young? Or are you going to start a couple feet away from the drip line and then know that next year it's going to access that water? So was that sufficient, Sierra?
Yeah, and then I also wanted to add to Joe's question, because I know you covered it in previous sessions, but either I missed it today or we didn't cover that today. But when it comes to using that gray water, you made a point of saying it's great for like fruit trees and vegetables and produce that isn't touching the ground. But if it's like a root vegetable, like a carrot or a beet or a potato, you don't want to use the gray water because then it can come into direct contact with that item.
Yeah, thanks. I didn't include that today because we were focused on trees, but yeah, root vegetables are prohibited, and anything where you're eating the plant raw, especially, and it's like right by the ground, that's kind of gets you in this questionable zone. And I just say there's so many other plants to water, like forget about the lettuces and all those questionable plants and start with your biggest and then work your way down. And food, again, can be fine. Tomatoes, anything where the food's off the ground, corn, beans. But when the food's under the ground, definitely not. If it's touching the ground, that's in the questionable category.
I do not see any other questions. If anyone has any last minute questions, you can raise your hand or give you a few extra minutes to type in the chat. Not seeing any movement here. All right. So, no more questions. All right, so I guess that will be bringing us to the end of our session. I think that's a wrap. So if any questions come up after class, whether it's from this session or maybe a previous class, feel free to email us. Again, that email is conservation@bblgwp.com. And we'll work on getting those answers to you. Lastly, a huge, big thank you and round of applause to Laura for sharing all of her expertise on Greywater systems this summer and crafting it especially for Big Bear. Also, a big thank you to all of our participants, everyone here today, for joining, being engaged in these water conversations and learning. Some of you will be hearing from us in the following weeks about how we can get your free books and prizes to you. And if you missed any classes or want to watch them again, make sure you check out our YouTube channel by searching Big Bear Water in the search box. With that, wishing everyone a great rest of your week, summer, and happy fall. Stay safe and stay well.
Thank you.